Let's continue talking about situationships. Why do they feel like love? Right now, think about the most intense romantic feeling that you have ever had, where you checked your phone like 100 times in one day, where you replayed a conversation, you were trying to find that hidden meaning, where you were so preoccupied with that one person that you could not fully concentrate on anything else. Now, I want to ask you something. Do you think that that was love? Or was it something that your brain maybe was doing to you? Something that felt exactly like love, but was actually very sophisticated neurological trap. Today, we're going to talk about why situationships feel like love, like the most intense, alive, real version of love, and why ambiguity and inconsistency and uncertainty do not diminish romantic feeling, but they amplify it, and why everything that makes situationship not relationship is often the same thing that makes it feel more powerful than any relationship you have been in. And then we're going to make the distinction between what the brain experiences as love and what love actually is. So let's start with the brain, because this is where the story begins. The experience of love activates the brain's reward system. It makes love feel rewarding and sometimes addictive. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter that is associated with wanting and craving. It's not precisely the chemical of pleasure, it is the chemical of anticipation, the drive toward a reward you have not yet received. This is an important distinction, and it's the key to everything we're going to talk about today. Because dopamine is not what you feel when you get that text. Dopamine is what you feel when you are waiting for the text. It's not arrival, it's the aching state of not yet, where is it? This means that the brain's reward system is specifically designed to respond most powerfully to uncertainty. When you know a reward is coming, the brain does not need to mobilize all its resources. When you're not sure when the reward might come, or whether it will not come, or maybe it will come but not in the way you hoped, then your brain floods your nervous system. It cannot afford to miss that signal. And this is the neurological foundation of the situationships grip on us. And everything else we're going to talk about today builds on this. In behavioral psychology, it's called intermittent reinforcement. The principle was discovered by Skinner in experiments where animals received rewards on unpredictable schedules. When a partner's kindness is unpredictable, the brain releases more dopamine during good moments than it would in a consistently loving relationship. And that spark that you feel during reconciliation is your dopamine system responding to that uncertainty. Researchers demonstrated that dopamine flows more readily when rewards are unpredictable rather than consistent. So your brain learns that uncertain rewards are more valuable than those that are guaranteed. Now apply this to a situationship. The person who texts you every day, who makes you feel chosen, secure, consistently present, emotionally available, while your brain processes this as safe, good. These are amazing things, but neurologically, they do not create urgency and they do not flood the reward system. They settle into the background. He's reliable or she is reliable. But the person who texts you sometimes and not other times, who's warm one day and distant the next, and retreats into ambiguity once in a while, makes you feel like one moment you're the only person they see, and then they go quiet for several days. And your brain does not settle for that. Your brain locks on, and every signal becomes data. Every moment of connection becomes amplified because it is surrounded by uncertainty. Researchers distinguish between liking and wanting. Intermittent reinforcement boosts wanting most. You chase the next hit of attention even as your actual relationship satisfaction drops. And sometimes you want this person more than you like being with them. You desire that connection more than this connection is actually nourishing you. So from the inside, wanting and loving feel identical, and they use the same vocabulary and produce the same physical sensations, like your stomach drops, butterflies, all that. But chronic unpredictability also elevates cortisol, stress hormone. And the combination of energizing dopamine and stress hormones creates that cocktail that keeps you alert and over-aroused. And Those are ideal conditions for an addiction. This is why a situationship can feel more alive than a stable relationship, because you are literally in a state of physiological arousal much of the time. Your body is running a low grade stress response that your mind is interpreting as intensity or passion, or the feeling that something very important is happening. So when you are in a predictable, secure relationship and someone asks you how you feel, you might say, well, I'm good, happy, calm. When you are in a situationship and someone asks you how you feel, you might say, I don't know, I just feel so much. And that feeling so much is not fabricated, and at the same time, it is not evidence of love. It is evidence of a dysregulated nervous system, and nervous system that has become organized around the presence or absence of one specific person. So during periods of distance or emotional withdrawal, your body floods with cortisol. Your heart races, thoughts spiral, you're in distress, and then you reconnect and your brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. And that swing from cortisol driven panic to oxytocin fueled calm creates that chemical signature the brain begins to crave. And the reunion hits harder than it would in a stable relationship. Well, because the preceding withdrawal made it scarce. The warmth feels more meaningful because it followed pain. And the brain, which is a pattern recognition machine, begins to pair the two. I suffer, then I'm relieved. The suffering and the relief become neurologically linked, and over time, the suffering begins to feel like part of the reward. This brings us to a concept of limerence. The term limerence was coined by psychologist Dorothy Tanoff in her 1979 book Love and Limerence. Tanoff used it to describe the intense obsessive feelings of infatuation that many people experience in romantic attraction. Limerence thrives on fantasy, uncertainty, and emotional highs. Limerence is an involuntary state of intense obsession, fixation, attachment to another person. These intense feelings often stem from unresolved relationships or unrequited love. Limerence feels exactly like love. It has all the surface features: that preoccupation, longing, sense that this person is singular, irreplaceable, the feeling that your whole day shifts based on a single interaction with them. People in limerence state describe it as the most profound feeling of their lives. And they are not wrong. This feeling does feel profound. They are wrong about what the feeling means. This is why limerence often intensifies around people who are emotionally unavailable or ambiguous rather than clearly interested in you. A person who consistently reciprocates your feelings can actually resolve limerence because the uncertainty goes away. But the person who gives you just enough hope to keep you engaged without ever fully committing creates the perfect conditions for the obsession to go deeper. Because your brain keeps chasing the reward because it cannot predict when the next hit of validation will arrive. The situationship is neurologically, psychologically a limerence machine. Every element of its structure, the inconsistency, the ambiguity about the future, the moments of warmth that are surrounded by uncertainty, everything is calibrated to keep your brain's desire circuitry running at maximum intensity. So now I want to introduce something that Tanoff called crystallization. Crystallization is the process of decorating another person with imagined perfections. In a limerence state, you're not in a relationship with an actual human being. You are in a relationship with a composite, like part real person, part projection, part wish fulfillment. Every ambiguous behavior gets interpreted through a filter of idealization. If they're distant, it is because they're afraid of how deep this is. If they're inconsistent, it is because they are protecting themselves. The limerent mind is an extraordinarily creative defense attorney. It's constructing narratives that preserve the fantasy at all costs. The person you're attached to in a situationship is not entirely the real person. They are partly a construction of your own longing, maybe a figure you have assembled from fragments of real contact and an enormous amount of imagined interiority. You fill in the gaps of their ambiguity with the qualities you most need them to have. Their silence becomes depth, and their inconsistency becomes complexity. Their inability to commit becomes a wound that you hope to heal. Individuals experiencing limerence cannot describe their limerent objects' values or their decision-making patterns or how they behave under stress. They can describe in extraordinary detail every ambiguous gesture that might signal interest. Think about that. You may be able to tell me what time they last texted and what the exact wording was. You may be able to tell me what they said that one night that sounded like an admission of feeling. You may have an elaborate interpretive framework for every interaction, but can you tell me who they are when things are hard? How they handle disappointment? What they do when someone they care about really needs them? Do you actually know this person, or do you know the version of them that uncertainty has allowed you to construct in your mind? Here's where we have to bring in attachment theory, because the vulnerability to limerence and to the specific chemistry of situationships is not uniform. Some people's nervous systems are much more susceptible than others, and that susceptibility has roots and that go back long before any situationship. Individuals with anxious attachment styles show significantly higher limerence proneness. If you grew up in an environment where love was inconsistent, where the people who were supposed to be reliably present were sometimes warm, sometimes cold, sometimes available, sometimes absent, your nervous system learned to organize itself around that inconsistency. It learned that love comes in surges, not in steady streams, that you have to be vigilant because the warmth can disappear, that the way to feel loved is to work for it, to earn it, wait for love. And then an adult comes along who's warm sometimes and distant at other times, and that adult makes you feel chosen in moments and makes you feel uncertain in between. So your nervous system does not register that as a red flag. It registers this as familiar experience, as the texture of love, because this is what love has always felt like from the inside in your life. And that drop in serotonin and spike in cortisol associated with heightened uncertainty may be compelling for you, because if you've been treated poorly, especially by your early attachment figures, it may mimic the neurobiological activity that you experienced around caregivers who were unpredictable and at the same time remain the primary source of emotional and physical survival for you. So this is one of the most important things that I want to say today. The chemistry of the situationship does not just feel like love. For many people, it feels like love specifically because it matches that template of love that was installed in their earliest relationships. Stable, predictable, consistent love can actually feel less compelling to someone with an anxious attachment history, not because they don't want it, but because their nervous system hasn't learned to recognize it as love. And security can feel like the absence of passion for you. Calm can feel like the absence of feeling. Intermittent reinforcement results in more persistent behavior that resists extinction. When reinforcement is given sporadically, the behavior continues even without reinforcement, as the person holds onto the hope that it might still occur in the future. This is why leaving a situationship is so much harder than leaving a relationship that was clearly bad. A relationship that is clearly bad gives you a coherent narrative. This was harmful and I am leaving. But a situationship does not give you that narrative. What you're leaving is your hope, the version of this person that you constructed. You are living the feeling, not the reality. And the feeling has been chemically reinforced to be among the most intense sensations that you've ever experienced. And then there's the sunk cost, the months of emotional investment, conversations where you thought there was something real, the intimacy that you shared. And living means admitting that all of that did not produce what you needed it to produce. And your brain resists that. Limerence has a natural lifespan. Typically lasts between 18 months and 3 years. In some cases, it can persist for a decade or longer, particularly when there's ongoing intermittent reinforcement. The duration is determined by the reinforcement schedule, and consistent availability or consistent absence both resolve that. Only uncertainty sustains that. So the duration of that feeling is determined not by how real the connection is, but by how much uncertainty is maintained. Remember that. If the person becomes consistently available, limerence resolves because the brain no longer needs to chase. If the person disappears entirely, limerence resolves because there's nothing left to chase. The only thing that keeps it alive is the ongoing alternation between hope and disappointment. So that's what situationship provides. The central question: if this is not love, what is love? I think it is genuinely one of the most important questions you can ask. And people are trying to answer that question. for centuries. So limerence is involuntary and consuming. Your nervous system is hijacked by intrusive thoughts, dopamine spikes, and that need for reciprocity. Real love is voluntary and grounded. You choose the person each day. You can be apart without distress, and the relationship has room for both people to remain themselves. Limerence runs on uncertainty. Love is built on safety. And love, which is mature, does not feel like a slot machine. It doesn't feel like emergency. It doesn't feel like the most awake you've ever been. Well, not consistently. Mature love has periods of extraordinary aliveness, of course, but it also has periods of quiet, ease, that deep comfort that comes from being known and not having to perform or interpret or work hard for that connection. A person can mistake the fading of obsession for the fading of love. Like, I do not feel the same way about them anymore. And often it means that my dopamine loop has been interrupted by their consistent availability. What happens next determines whether the couple builds genuine love or the formerly limerent person goes looking for the next dopamine source. This is one of the most heartbreaking patterns that I see clinically. Someone finally enters a stable relationship with someone who treats them consistently well, and within a few months, they're bored. They say the feeling is gone. They wonder if the person is actually right for them. They may even leave and find themselves 6 months later intensely drawn to someone who is unavailable. They're not chasing love. They're chasing that neurological state that they have learned to identify as love. And those are two completely different things. I want to name something that lives at the intersection of all of this, something that I think explains why we do not just stumble into situationships, but often return to them, even when we know better. Vulnerability is terrifying. Real intimacy, the kind that could actually give you what you are looking for, requires you to be known, the actual you. Your fears, your patterns, your disappointments, the ways you're difficult or maybe inconsistent or wounded. A situationship never asks for that, because a situationship never reaches the depth at which those things would be even relevant. You can stay in the exciting early stage version of yourself forever, because nothing ever resolves into the ordinary real life. And paradoxically, the situationship protects you from exactly what you say you want. It gives you the feeling of intensity while protecting you from the risk of being truly seen. And it is, in a very real sense, some sort of intimacy without exposure. The attachment history makes that trap feel familiar, and the fear of genuine vulnerability makes the trap feel safe. This is why people stay, not because they're foolish or weak, but because all of these forces are operating at the same time below the level of consciousness. So how do you begin to tell the difference in real time? The first question is this: am I at peace when I am not with this person, or am I in a low-grade state of waiting? Genuine connection does not require constant monitoring. It does not produce the kind of ambient anxiety that settles over you on days when you have not heard from someone. If your emotional equilibrium is contingent on their behavior today, if a long response time throws you off, you're not at peace with this person. You are organized around them. That is limerence. That is the dopamine loop, and it's not love. The second question: do I know who this person actually is, or do I know who I need them to be? Can you tell me how they handle conflict, how they treat people who cannot do anything for them, what they are genuinely afraid of, what they value when no one is watching? If your knowledge of them is primarily built from their effect on you rather than from genuine witnessing of who they are, you are in relationship with a projection. The projection is very compelling and it's yours, but you cannot build life with a projection. The third question, and this is the hardest one: would this feel as powerful if they were consistently available? If tomorrow they called and said, I want to be with you, fully, clearly, no ambiguity, would you feel relief and joy, or would you feel that game just ended? If the availability would resolve the feeling rather than deepen it, that is important information, because love deepens with availability and limerence dissolves with availability. There is something worth saying about what it takes to move from the chemistry of ambiguity toward the experience of actual love. It is not primarily about finding the right person. Of course, it matters, but it is about tolerating the transition, the period when a connection becomes stable and the intensity drops, and you're left with the quieter, less chemically exciting experience of actually knowing someone. That transition is the moment many people leave their relationships because it feels like loss. That electricity that felt like proof of something real seems to have gone. What was actually gone is the stress response. What was actually gone is that cortisol, and you're left with something the nervous system has never learned to identify as love, even if it is far more nourishing and far more real. So, learning to recognize safety as love, to feel the warmth of consistent care as evidence of something worth having rather than evidence that the stakes have lowered, is often the real work. It does not happen overnight, but you can do that. The situationship feels like love because your brain was built to respond most powerfully to uncertainty. Because intermittent reinforcement activates the same neural circuitry as addiction, and limerence is indistinguishable from love from the inside. And your attachment history may have taught you that inconsistency is what love looks like. None of this means the feeling is not real. The feeling is completely real. What is not real is what the feeling is telling you it means. The intensity is not a measure of the depth of the connection. And obsession is not a measure of the other person's worth or your worth. The chemistry should not guide you. Real love is quieter. It is less urgent. It doesn't make you feel like you're drowning and being rescued by this person. It asks something harder of you than craving does. It asks you to be present and known, and to choose someone in that stillness without the amplification of chemistry telling you that you have no other option. Love is less dramatic. So if this gave you something to think about, if you recognized yourself somewhere in that talk, I would really encourage you to sit with these questions. Do not criticize yourself. Just learning more about yourself, because the moment you can name what is happening in your nervous system, you have a little more room to choose. And please comment on whether you experienced limerence, whether you've been in situationship, and what helped you to either switch to stable relationship or get out of it. Because I think situationships are prevalent these days, and many people struggle and would benefit from your insight. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.